Stefan stepped into the kitchen, tired from another long day at work. The house was quiet, almost eerily so, save for the faint clink of glass against the counter. Elena stood near the stove, a nearly empty bottle of wine beside her, fingers tracing the rim of her glass in nervous, jittery movements. She didn't look up when he entered, but he saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she clenched her jaw like she was holding something back. Something had been off for months. The late nights at work, the sudden, unexplained trips out of town. Stefan wasn't a fool. He knew her behavior was more than just the pressures of a demanding job. He didn't need to hire a private investigator to confirm what he already suspected. Her text messages were short, abrupt. The intimacy between them had all but vanished, replaced by silence and awkwardness. He was just waiting for her to say it, waiting for her to finally admit what she thought she'd been hiding so well. "Stefan," Elena's voice trembled, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. She turned, her eyes rimmed with tears, staring at the wine glass like it held the answers she needed. "We need to talk." Stefan didn't flinch. He knew this moment was coming. He had spent countless nights wondering how he would react. Anger, devastation, maybe even indifference by this point. "About John," she added, her voice cracking as his name left her lips. Stefan remained still, his face unreadable. He was prepared for this, perhaps not emotionally but mentally. He was ready for her confession. He'd already pieced together enough. This was just the beginning. The name hung in the air like poison. John. Stefan had heard that name in passing before, Elena's colleague, the one she occasionally mentioned with a little too much enthusiasm. He hadn't thought much of it at first. They all worked long hours and Elena was dedicated. But then the late night meetings became more frequent, the excuses a little too rehearsed. "John," Stefan repeated, his voice flat. He leaned against the counter, folding his arms across his chest. He wasn't going to make this easy for her. "Go on, I'm listening." Elena's eyes flicked up, searching his face for some hint of emotion, some crack in the armor he had carefully placed around himself. But Stefan had practiced this moment in his mind, how he would remain calm, composed. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him break. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she started, wringing her hands as if trying to squeeze the guilt out through her fingers. It started small. Conversations, work lunches, and then it became more. Stefan's stomach twisted, but he gave no outward sign. "How much more, Elena?" She hesitated. "It's not what you think," she rushed. It hasn't gone that far. Not physically, anyway. But there's something between us. A connection. I just felt like I wasn't alive anymore. Like we were drifting apart, and he made you feel alive again?" Stefan finished for her, his voice low, thick with restrained bitterness. He had heard enough stories from friends, colleagues, even strangers in bar stories about how someone's partner found a spark elsewhere because the routine of marriage had dulled the excitement. Yet he hadn't expected to be living that story himself. Elena nodded, tears now streaking down her face, but Stefan found no sympathy rising in him. He stared at her, wondering how they had gotten here. He wasn't perfect, he knew that. He worked long hours, too. The kids, the mortgage, the day-to-day stress of life had taken a toll on their relationship. But he had stayed faithful. He had tried. "And now what?" he asked, his voice cold. "You're telling me this because you feel guilty? Because you think I deserve to know? Or are you hoping I'll understand and let you keep whatever this is going with him?" Elena's face contorted with shame, but she didn't look away. "I'm telling you because I don't want to lie anymore," she whispered. "Because I don't know what to do. I love you, Stefan, I do. But I can't ignore that there's something missing." Stefan scoffed, the sound bitter. "Something missing. And you think John's the answer?" "I don't know," she cried, voice rising with frustration. "I don't know what the answer is. I just wanted to feel something again. I'm so tired of feeling like I'm trapped in this life that I never wanted to begin with. The kids, the house, the routine, it's suffocating me." Her words hit Stefan like a punch to the gut. For years, he had believed they were building a life together, working toward something, making sacrifices for their family. Now she was telling him she felt trapped in that very life. "And what do you want me to do with this, Elena?" Stefan said, his voice hard. "Do you expect me to forgive you? To let you have your little affair with John on the side while we keep playing house?" "No," she said quietly, tears flowing freely now. "No, I don't expect that. But I thought maybe we could, I don't know, try something else. Something different." Stefan raised an eyebrow. "Different? What, like an open marriage?" He laughed bitterly at the absurdity of it. Elena's silence was all the confirmation he needed. He shook his head in disbelief, turning away from her. The woman he had built his life with, the mother of his children, was standing in their kitchen, asking him to share her with another man. "I can't believe this," he muttered, rubbing his hands over his face. Stefan paced around the kitchen, his body tense, as if the very act of standing still might cause him to explode. Elena watched him, her own face a mix of desperation and guilt. But she stayed silent, allowing him to process what she had just suggested. He couldn't believe it. After everything they'd been through, years of raising their children, surviving job changes, hospital visits, and sleepless nights, this was where they ended up. An open marriage was her solution. He turned abruptly, locking eyes with her. "Is this what you think we've come to, Elena? If you think bringing another man into our marriage is going to fix us, you think it'll make everything okay?" She flinched at his tone, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. "I don't know, Stefan. I don't know what's right anymore. I don't want to lose you, but I can't lie and pretend I don't have feelings for John. It's not that simple." Stefan laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "It is that simple. You don't get to have both, Elena. You don't get to keep me on the hook while you play out your little fantasy with him. That's not how this works. I'm not asking for a lifetime with him," she shouted, her voice cracking under the strain of emotions. "I'm asking for a chance for us to try something new, so maybe we can find our way back to each other." Her words only fueled the rage that had been simmering inside him since she first mentioned John's name. Stefan slammed his fist onto the countertop, making Elena jump. "Find our way back to each other?" He snarled, his face twisted with disbelief. "By what? Destroying everything we built. Do you even hear yourself?" "I do hear myself," she snapped, her own anger flaring up now. "I hear myself, and I know this sounds insane. But do you think I want this? Do you think I wanted to fall for someone else? To be in this position? I've been drowning for years, Stefan, and you didn't even notice." Stefan took a step back, her words cutting deeper than he expected. He had noticed things weren't perfect. He wasn't blind, but this. He didn't realize she had felt so suffocated, so lost. But that still didn't justify what she was asking of him. "I've been trying," he said quietly, his voice losing its sharpness. "I've been doing everything I can to keep this family together. Taking on more at home, stepping up with the kids, giving you space when you needed it. I thought we were just tired. I thought that's what happens after years of marriage, after kids. I didn't think it meant you'd go looking for someone else."
Elena's face softened, the fight draining out of her. "I know you've tried. I see it. And it's not that I don't love you, because I do. But something's broken, Stefan. And I don't know how to fix it."
Stefan let out a long breath, running his hands through his hair. He felt like he was staring down the barrel of a gun, caught between two choices, neither of which felt like a win. And if he agreed to this, if he let her explore her feelings, for John it would shatter everything he believed in about marriage, about loyalty. But if he didn't, then what? Was divorce the only other option? "How long, Elena?" he asked, his voice quieter now, the fight starting to leave him. "How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, a fresh wave of guilt washing over her. "It's been a few months. It started small, like I said, just talking. And then feelings grew." Stefan's heart sank. Months, while he had been carrying on, doing his best to keep things steady, Elena had been cultivating feelings for another man right under his nose. The betrayal tasted bitter in his mouth, making it hard to even look at her. "And what you think if I say no, this thing between you and John will just stop?" he asked bitterly. "I'll stop," Elena whispered. "If you can't handle it, I'll end it. I swear, Stefan. I wanted to be honest with you before things went further." Stefan stared at her, trying to piece together what kind of man he would have to be to say yes to this. To let his wife, the woman he'd shared his life with, pursue another man? How could he ever live with himself after that? He finally spoke, his voice raw with emotion. "You've already gone too far, Elena. I don't think you realize how much you've broken."
The silence that followed was suffocating.
Elena stood frozen, the weight of Stefan's words hitting her harder than she expected. She had prepared herself for this conversation, rehearsed the ways it could go in her mind, but nothing could have readied her for the reality of seeing him like this, torn between devastation and anger, the man she once knew crumbling right before her eyes. His words echoed in the stillness of the kitchen, the air heavy with the wreckage of their unraveling marriage. Stefan's gaze never left her, his eyes dark, hollowed out with hurt. "So this is what it comes to? You feel trapped in the life we built, and your solution is him?" He spat out the last word, his disdain for John palpable. So is that the answer to all of this? Another man. Elena's lips quivered, the truth burning on her tongue. She wished it could be simpler, that she could tell him what he wanted to hear, that she was sorry, that she would end it. But something inside her, a stubborn streak of defiance, stopped her. The truth was, She wasn't sure ending things with John would fix the hole in her heart. It wasn't just about John, it was about everything. The life she never asked for, the overwhelming responsibility of it all, and the way she had slowly lost herself in the process. I don't know what the answer is, she whispered, shaking her head. But I know I can't keep pretending. We've been drifting apart for so long, Stefan. I don't even recognize us anymore. And John, he reminded me of who I used to be. Who I could still be. Stefan's laugh was sharp, humorless, cutting through her like a blade. Of course, the classic story. Husband works too much, wife feels neglected, and some guy comes along to remind her of who she really is. I've seen this play out before. Hell, I've heard it 100 times from guys who never saw it coming. His face hardened, the pain now giving way to something darker, resentment. You think this is just about you, Alina? You think I'm happy with how things have been? You think I don't miss the way we used to be? But you didn't see me running off to find someone else the moment things got hard. That's not fair, Alina shot back, her voice rising. You weren't the one at home every night, feeling like a ghost in your own life. You weren't the one raising the kids while juggling work while trying to keep everything together. Yet you had your career, your distractions. I had nothing but this endless routine that sucked the life out of me. Stefan's jaw clenched, his fists balling at his sides. Don't you dare make this about how hard your life is. We both made sacrifices, Elena. We both gave up things. But I didn't expect you to give up on us. Elena flinched, guilt flashing across her face, but she stood her ground. I'm not giving up, she whispered, though the words sounded hollow even to her. I'm just trying to figure out how to save myself. And I thought maybe, just maybe you'd understand that. Stefan's eyes narrowed, the last bit of patience draining from him. Save yourself? From what? The life we built together? The family we made? Is that really what you want to escape from? Elena's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she didn't have an answer. Maybe it was. Maybe she did want to escape from the monotony, from the suffocating expectations, from the guilt of wanting more than what her life had turned into. But saying that out loud felt like signing the death warrant of their marriage. And deep down, despite everything, she wasn't ready to let go of Stefan. Not completely. I don't want to escape, she said finally, her voice small, fragile. I just want something to change. I want us to find a way to make this work, to be happy again. Stefan stared at her like she had just slapped him. His mouth tightened, and he stepped back, shaking his head. You really think we can be happy after this? After what you've done? I haven't slept with him, Stefan, Elena pleaded, her desperation spilling over. I swear to you it hasn't gone that far. But the feelings are there, and I don't know how to make them go away. Stefan's expression was unreadable, his eyes dark as he stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he took a step forward, his voice dangerously calm. It doesn't matter if you haven't slept with him. You let it get this far. You let those feelings grow. You let him come between us. Selena's breath hitched, the finality of his words sinking in. She wanted to say something to defend herself, but what was left to say? She had betrayed him, maybe not physically, but emotionally in every way that counted. Stefan took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he ran them through his hair. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I can't do this, Elena. I can't pretend that everything's okay. I thought I could, but I can't. Tears welled in her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. Please, Stefan, we can still fix this. We can still try. He'd try. But Stefan only shook his head, the distance between them growing with every second. No, he said softly, his voice breaking. It's already broken. And with that, he turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Elena standing alone in the wreckage of their marriage. Stefan walked down the hallway, his footsteps heavy as he made his way to the living room. The walls that once felt like the fortress of their home now seemed to close in on him. Each picture on the wall, each piece of furniture, everything reminded him of the life they had built together. The life that now felt like it was crumbling beneath his feet. He reached the couch and sank into it, burying his face in his hands. Upstairs, he could hear the faint sounds of their children, laughing at some show on TV, oblivious to the storm brewing downstairs. He thought of them, how they relied on him, on Elena, to keep things stable, to keep the family intact. But how could they do that now, with this betrayal hanging between them? Stefan knew he couldn't just walk away. The kids were still there. He couldn't leave them, not like this. But the thought of staying, of sharing a home with Elena after everything she had confessed, felt unbearable. She might not have slept with John yet, but emotionally, she was already gone. She had chosen someone else, whether she admitted it or not. As he sat there, trying to collect his thoughts, he heard Elena's soft footsteps approaching from the kitchen. She appeared in the doorway, looking fragile and small, her eyes pleading for some kind of resolution. But Stefan didn't move. He couldn't. Not yet. I don't want to lose you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Stefan, please, we can figure this out. We can work through this. Stefan lifted his head slowly, staring at her from the couch. He could see the desperation in her eyes, but it only made the bitterness rise inside him. Figure this out. Elena, what exactly do you think we're figuring out? You want to keep our marriage, but you also want to keep John. That's not something you just work through. She winced, as if his words had struck her physically. It's not about choosing between you two, she said, stepping further into the room. I love you, Stefan, I always have, but something's broken and I don't know how to fix it. If you keep saying something's broken, he interrupted, his voice harsh. And you know what? You're right, something is broken, but it's not just the marriage, Elena, it's trust. It's loyalty. You've already replaced me in your heart, and I can't compete with that. I haven't replaced you. Elena shot back, her own anger rising now. You think this is what I wanted? If you think I wanted to feel this way, to hurt you, I didn't. But it happened, and now I'm trying to be honest about it. Stefan's eyes flared with anger, and he shot up from the couch, closing the distance between them in a few quick steps. Honest? You're only being honest now because you got caught. If I hadn't pressed you, you'd still be sneaking around, wouldn't you? Still texting him behind my back, still having your secret little lunches and God knows what else. Elena backed up, her hands trembling at her sides. I told you everything, Stefan. I didn't have to. I could have kept lying, but I didn't. I'm trying to fix this. Stefan let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Fix it? By asking me to accept an affair? By suggesting we open up our marriage so you can have both of us? That's not fixing it, Elena. That's destroying it. She was crying now, the tears flowing freely down her cheeks. I don't know what else to do. I'm lost, Stefan. I'm lost in this marriage, in this life, and I don't know how to find my way back. Stefan's heart twisted in his chest at the sight of her tears, but he couldn't bring himself to comfort her. Not this time. You should have thought about that before you let someone else into our marriage, he said coldly. Before you decided that I wasn't enough for you. Elena flinched as if he had slapped her, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I didn't mean to fall for him, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It happened. And I didn't know how to stop it. Stefan closed his eyes, trying to block out the pain, the rage, the overwhelming sense of betrayal. He wanted to yell, to scream at her, to demand she take it all back. But he knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was already done. No amount of tears or apologies could undo the fact that she had given her heart to someone else. Do you love him? Stefan asked suddenly, his voice hoarse. Elena hesitated, her eyes darting away from his. I don't know. Stefan clenched his fists, the words twisting like a knife in his gut. You don't know? He repeated, his voice rising. How do you not know? You've been carrying on with him for months, and you don't even know if you love him. I love you, she said quickly, desperately. That's all that matters, Stefan. I love you, and I want to make this work. I want to fix us. Stefan's gaze hardened. You can't fix something that's already broken, Elena. The silence between them was suffocating, the weight of their crumbling marriage pressing down on both of them. Stefan turned away, his hands shaking as he struggled to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to drown him. I'm going to stay with a friend tonight, he said quietly, not looking at her. Elena's eyes widened in panic. Stefan, please. But he was already walking away, grabbing his jacket from the hallway. I can't do this right now, he muttered, his voice tight. I need space. And before she could say another word, he was out the door, leaving Elena standing alone in the hollow shell of their home. The night air hit Stefan's face like a blast of ice, cooling the fiery storm raging inside him. He didn't know where he was going, he just needed to get out of the house, away from Elena and the suffocating weight of her betrayal. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of everything that had just shattered. The familiar streets around him blurred as he walked, his mind spiraling. She loved him. That was the part that twisted the knife deepest. Elena claimed she still loved him, but she didn't know if she loved John too. What kind of madness was that? If she loved Stefan, how could she ask him to share her heart and maybe her body with another man? He kept walking, his breath visible in the cold night, the sounds of the city fading into the background as he replayed the conversation in his head. Her tears, her excuses, the quiet admission that had gutted him. It just happened. How many times had he heard those words and stories from friends who went through similar things? It felt like a terrible cliche, except this time it was his life. His wife. He found himself in front of his friend Matt's place. They'd known each other since college, and Matt had been through a rough divorce himself just 2 years ago. Stefan hesitated for a moment, unsure if he was ready to share this part of his life with anyone yet. But he had no choice. He needed to talk to someone. He needed to unload this burden before it crushed him.
He knocked, 3 quick raps on the door, and after a minute, Matt answered, blinking groggily in the dim light. "Stefan? What the hell, man? It's the middle of the night."
"I need a place to crash," Stefan said, his voice hoarse. "Is that okay?" Matt's eyes narrowed, taking in the strained look on Stefan's face. He stepped aside and nodded. "Of course. Come in, man." The warmth of Matt's apartment was almost too much, suffocating after the cold clarity of the outside air. Stefan shrugged off his jacket and dropped it on the nearest chair, collapsing onto the couch. Matt sat across from him, his face full of concern. "What's going on?" Matt asked, leaning forward, his voice softer now. "You look like you've been hit by a truck." Stefan swallowed hard, feeling the sting of tears at the back of his eyes, but he pushed them down. He wouldn't cry. Not yet. Not in front of Matt. "Elena, she's been seeing someone. A guy from work, John." Matt's face darkened. "Damn, I'm sorry, man. How long has this been going on?" "A few months." The words tasted bitter coming out of his mouth, like poison. "She says it hasn't gone physical yet, but the feelings, they're there. She admitted to it all tonight." Matt sat back, running a hand through his hair. "Jesus. So what now? Are you going to try to work through it?" Stefan let out a hollow laugh, rubbing his hands over his face. "That's the thing. She actually suggested we try something new. As if we could keep the marriage going if I let her be with him too. Like an open marriage." His voice cracked at the absurdity of it.
Matt stared at him, his face unreadable. Then he shook his head, disbelief written all over it. "She asked you that? Seriously?"
Stefan nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "I couldn't believe it either. It's like she doesn't get it. She doesn't understand what she's asking." Matt leaned forward again, his eyes hard. "That's not something you come back from, Stefan. If she's already entertaining that idea, man, I hate to say it, but it might be too late." Stefan's chest tightened, the thought suffocating him. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can forgive her for this, but I don't want to lose everything. The kids, the life we built. It's all tangled up in this mess, and I don't know how to untangle it." Matt sighed, running his hand over his face. "Listen, I can't tell you what to do, but I've been there. I know what it's like to try and hold on to something that's already slipping away. It'll eat you alive if you're not careful." Stefan stared at the floor, his thoughts racing. He had always believed that no matter what, they would work through anything. That's what marriage was, wasn't it? But this was something else. It was betrayal, and it was more than just physical. It was emotional, and that cut deeper than anything else. "I don't know if I can fix this," Stefan muttered, his voice breaking. Matt didn't say anything, but Stefan could feel his sympathy, his understanding. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything pressing down on them. Finally, Stefan leaned back on the couch, closing his eyes. The reality of his crumbling marriage settling over him like a shroud. He had thought he could hold it all together. But now, it seemed like everything was already too far gone.
The next morning came too soon. Stefan hadn't slept. His mind had replayed every word, every moment between him and Elena, over and over again. He stared at the ceiling in Matt's dimly lit guest room, feeling the crushing weight of exhaustion, but sleep never came. It was as if his mind refused to shut down, trapped in a never-ending loop of disbelief, anger, and pain. The man he thought he was the husband, the father, the provider felt like a ghost now. Someone who had been hollowed out by betrayal, left to wander through the ruins of what his life had become.
The sun crept through the blinds, casting harsh light on a new day, and Stefan knew he couldn't avoid it anymore. The kids, his marriage, the decisions he had to make. He couldn't stay with Matt forever, hiding from the chaos. He had to face it, even if it meant walking straight into the heart of the storm. Matt found him in the kitchen, making coffee, looking as worn out as Stefan felt. "You sure you're ready to go back?" he asked, eyeing him carefully. Stefan nodded, though he didn't feel ready at all. "I don't have a choice. The kids are at home and I can't leave them wondering what's going on. I've got to talk to Elena, see what's next." Matt poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter. "Look, I know this is hell, but don't let her guilt or her tears make the decision for you. Do what's right for you, man. For the kids, sure, but don't forget about yourself in all this." Stefan looked down at the coffee in his hands, feeling the tremble in his fingers. "I hear you," he said softly, though he wasn't sure what right even looked like anymore. All he knew was that he had to go back home and figure out what was left to salvage. When Stefan pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had, a small suburban fortress with the front yard perfectly manicured, the car parked neatly beside his. But it felt different now, as if the foundation had cracked and no one could see it from the outside. He sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, before forcing himself out of the car.
Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kids must have gone to school by now, but he half expected them to still be there, as if everything had frozen since last night. But no life kept moving forward, even when you didn't want it to. Elena was in the kitchen again, sitting at the table this time, staring blankly into her cup of coffee. She looked up when she heard the door, her eyes bloodshot and puffy from crying. "Stefan," she began, but he held up a hand, stopping her.
"Don't," he said, his voice hollow. He didn't have the energy for another round of explanations or apologies. "We need to talk, but not like that." She nodded, her eyes welling up again, but she stayed silent as he walked into the living room, motioning for her to follow. He sat on the couch, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on him again. The familiar comfort of their home, now tainted by everything they had said the night before.
Elena sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap, waiting.
"I thought about it all night," Stefan began, his voice strained but steady. "I kept thinking maybe there was a way to fix this, to undo everything. But there isn't. You're right about one thing, something's broken. And it's not just us. It's me. I can't look at you the same way anymore, Elena. I can't trust you." She inhaled sharply, wiping at her eyes. "I swear, Stefan, I never wanted this to happen. I never meant to hurt you." "I know," he said, his voice softer. "I believe you didn't mean to hurt me. But that doesn't change the fact that you did. And now you're asking me to live with it, to share you with another man, because you don't know if you love him or not. How do you expect me to live with that?" Elena's lips trembled as she looked at him, the weight of her choice is evident in every tear. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know what I was thinking. I thought maybe if I was honest, we could find a way to make this work, but I see now I was wrong."
Stefan nodded, the bitterness he had been holding on to loosening its grip just enough for him to breathe. "You were wrong. I can't share you, Elena. I can't live with knowing that I'll always be wondering if you're thinking about him. I can't forgive that."
Her shoulders shook as she wept quietly, and for a brief moment, Stefan almost felt sorry for her. But then the anger returned, like a hot flash in his chest, and he pushed the sympathy aside. This wasn't about feeling sorry. This was about survival. His survival. "So what do we do now?" Elena asked, her voice small, almost childlike. Stefan swallowed hard. "I'm going to stay here for the kids. I don't want them to lose their home because of this. We'll figure out the details later, but I'm not leaving them." Elena nodded, biting her lip to keep from sobbing again. "And us?" Stefan stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for the woman he had loved for so many years. But all he saw now was a stranger. "There is no us anymore, Elena," he said quietly. "Not after this." Her face crumpled as the reality of his words sank in, but Stefan didn't flinch. He stood, turning toward the hallway. "I'll move into the guest room," he said, his back to her. "For now." Ow. And with that, he walked away, leaving her behind in the silence of the living room. So he knew there was no coming back from this. Their marriage, the life they had built, was over, even if the pieces were still standing. As Stefan closed the door to the guest room, he felt the first pang of relief, however small, and he had made his decision. There was no saving them. Not anymore. And as much as it hurt, as much as it tore him apart inside, he knew this was the only way forward.
It was time to let go.